Hello everyone, this is the second video on a very short mini-series about the Bunkai paradox, which is a blog that I wrote on our new website. So if you haven't seen part one, which was about the problems that we have in the study of Bunkai, I suggest that you have a look at that first, I put a link to that in the description below. But this follows on from a blog that I did on our new website, which again I put a link for in the description. So please feel free to check that out and subscribe if you haven't done already. Now, this video I want to focus on is the journey that you go through in the study of Bunkai. Now, I mentioned in the last video that something that I consider quite important as part of your journey is your purpose and your perspective. So, first of all, if we're starting to address some of the problems that we have with Bunkai, we have to consider what is the purpose of your training? What is it you're trying to get out of it? Now, your purpose is unique to you. If your purpose of your training is to become effective in dealing with situations in the street that you consider to be likely scenarios that you might have to use, or if your training is geared towards sporting competitions, for example, just as sort of two extremes, whatever your training is geared towards, you need to make sure that obviously your training is helping you to achieve those outcomes. And this is what will then affect our perspective when we analyse Bunkai. So if my thinking and my mindset is one of practical self-defense against a person in the street, then that's going to affect my perspective on the way that I think about Bunkai. If my perspective is to be able to improve my defense against another karateka, that is an equally valid purpose and an equally valid perspective, but it will change the way that I think about the nature of Bunkai. So what I'm saying is that neither of these are wrong, but we have to always consider what is our purpose and our perspective, because that will change the dynamic. Now, based on that, I can look at one movement in a kata and I can have two very different outcomes depending on how my purpose and my perspective changes that. But what the kata really does is, in both, even though I might end up with a technique that looks fundamentally different, is the kata merely presents us with principles, which is something that is not probably explored as much as it should be, and is really the key to tying kata together. Kata explores principles that obviously have been recorded from teachers before. What techniques did they think and what principles did they think come together to form an effective system, or methodology is probably a better word. So purpose and perspective is something we must consider, and that leads us to common principles. Now, in our sort of journey of kata, when we're sort of learning Bunkai, obviously first we learn the solo form, but we then have to go through the stages of understanding. And one of the issues that sometimes people have is that they will look at a movement and they just won't be able to visualise or contextualise what they're doing with that movement initially. And this is where I just want to talk for a moment about levels of competence. And so we have 4 levels: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. If you manage to remember all that, well done. So the first level, unconscious incompetence, basically means you don't know what you don't know. When you first learn kata, you have no preconceptions potentially. You are an open book, and so this is where the role of the teacher becomes really key in helping us on our journey of understanding kata. So the teacher is very much going to be our first sort of gateway into understanding it. They're going to present us with the kata, they're going to teach it us, they're going to train us, they're going to show us certain aspects of it. And this will then move us from unconscious incompetence, where we don't know what we don't know, to, okay, I now know what it is I can't do, so I am consciously incompetent. I can't actually do the skills yet. And then through training and through practice and through working with my teacher and refining what it is I'm doing, I'm going to get to that level of conscious competence, where when I'm thinking about what I'm doing, I will understand it. And then it's only through a long period of pushing that even further that I will get to that period of unconscious competence, where I don't have to think about what I'm doing, but I can do it instinctively. I've trained my reflexes, I've trained the drill to respond instinctively to a specific movement. And that's very much the goal, and how kata helps us to deal with self-defense situations and things like that. So that's the journey that we sort of go through with our teacher. Now, on top of this, the way I sometimes describe it to my students is that Bunkai and kata is a little bit like a mirror. And in the blog that I put, I used a koan as an example of this, which I'm going to leave for the blog. But the reason I think of it like a mirror is because a mirror simply reflects what's there. And so in our understanding of Bunkai, quite often people will struggle with an understanding of a movement or won't be able to see other options because the kata is merely a mirror. In the way that the Bunkai works is it is merely a reflective tool that demonstrates our level of understanding. And it is about developing that understanding that it becomes key. If you translate the word Bunkai, it can mean to break down or to analyse. And if you think about levels of thinking, we start with knowledge and understanding, then we go through application and analysis. And then beyond that, we also have evaluation and synthesis, which is the highest order thinking skills that we can have. So when we first learn kata, we're going to first of all try to develop basic levels of understanding. What are the movements? What am I trying to achieve? And we'll think about omote, bunkai. We'll think about what's on the surface. So omote literally means the surface or the side that is facing you in Japanese. It's what is obvious, So in this case, a block is probably a block, and a kick is probably a kick, and there isn't anything more to it than that. Of course, as our understanding goes on and we develop and we analyse further, we then start to see that these movements, and that's all we really have in kata, we just have movements, can then also be applied in different situations. So we then have the prospect of there being multiple applications of the same movement. And this is where we really need to make sure that we don't forget on our journey of Bunkai to pass it through the highest level of thinking. We have to pass it through evaluation, because if we go with the idea that we have purpose and perspective driving what we do, we have to evaluate the movements that we come up with against our purpose and our perspective. And this is really key to something, the way that I teach Bunkai and the way that I think about it. If I am clear about my purpose and my perspective, does the kata or the Bunkai work in an effective way to deliver that? So when I talk about Bunkai, I think of it as only really two categories: effective Bunkai and stuff that's meant for the trash heap, ineffective Bunkai, but only ineffective given potentially a certain scenario. It might be perfectly effective in a sporting context, but not effective in the real world. Depends upon the rules of which the contest I'm engaged is work. So my purpose and perspective will affect that. So that's just a little bit about the journey that we go through as we sort of look at Bunkai. So our perspective will change over time, and this idea of the mirror is important to me because it's the idea that actually when we look at our understanding, we see what is there. So if I don't recognise a meaning behind a movement, what that actually shows me is there's a gap in my knowledge that I need to sort of plug. And just as a final thought on this, think about the fact that there are systems that operate without kata. They work perfectly well without it. So in that case, you've got to think, okay, well, where's the real value in kata training? And obviously, if they don't have kata, what they usually have in its place is drills. And those drills are usually designed to develop specific skill sets. Now, kata can obviously serve that same purpose, but the thing that to me makes kata more powerful is that even though a kata may have originally been designed with a specific drill in mind, as I will come on to in the next video, I may not ever know what that is. So what's important for me is that kata then becomes a stimulus. It becomes a stimulus to not just one potential drill, but to a whole series of drills. And what the kata does is it provides the glue to pull all of those things together. It creates unity, and it is ultimately serves as like this wonderful reflective tool to make all of the things that I am talking about and all the ideas that I'm training and I'm practicing come back together. And that is why it becomes the essence of a system or a style. And that's where, to me, it's power lines. So kata and bunkai and its study, to me, are an ultimate stimulus and reflective tool on my own level of understanding and my own level of training. So the next video I'm going to do that's going to follow on directly from this is my personal truths about bunkai, the things and the assumptions that I have in my head when I'm working with bunkai that I personally hold to be true. Obviously the last video I did is on the problems, so if you've not seen that, I'm going to put a link to both of them in the description below. And then from next week, hopefully we'll be able to do some bunkai applications for you guys to have a look at. So again, just like with the problems video, if there's anything you agree, disagree with, please put a comment in the comment below and let me know. It would be wonderful to have a conversation with you. See you next week.